Hi and welcome to this seminar, which is a part of Malmö in the Making, where we explore what the rooms of the city, the architecture, the culture means for the citizens in Malmö and how we can shape the city together going forward. You will find more information about Malmö in the Making at malmo.se. My name is Anders Milner, and today we are going to talk about what it means to be a president city in Europe, a forerunner, a city that takes a lead when it comes to climate action. We do have a chat here today, so please don't hesitate to write your questions to our guests in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A session later. This event will be recorded, and you will find a link to the recording at malmo.se/klimat, and where you can also read about the climate transition work taking place in Malmö. Now, Malmö and Copenhagen are two of 100 cities aiming to be climate neutral by 2030, and Malmö is also one of 3 cities pinpointed as pilot cities. Those cities get extra financing from the EU, and this is all part of an EU mission called Net Zero Cities. So we have a vision here about Europe, about Copenhagen, and about Malmö in the very near future. Let's take a look at that vision. With us, we now have Thomas Osterba, Program Director for Net Zero Cities. Welcome, Thomas.
Good morning, and thank you, Anders, for that nice introduction and for inviting me to join in this presentation. And I look forward to the discussion, any questions, and the steps that will be taken together here in Malmö. I have a brief presentation to share to help to introduce you to the mission for climate neutral and smart cities by 2030. I'll talk a little bit about what cities are involved, the overall goals, and the approach that's being taken to give you a sense of what kind of help the Commission is offering to cities and the ways that the cities will work together and with support from Net Zero Cities to achieve these goals and a very ambitious mission, which has really captured the attention of cities across Europe. And I just had a call with cities in Australia who are trying to follow the lead of what the Commission has launched here and inspired by leading cities like Copenhagen and Malmö. So this will be a relatively short presentation to give you some information, and I'll include some details at the end about how to stay in touch with Net Zero Cities via social media and our website. Just about 2 years ago now, the European Commission formally launched its mission for climate neutral and smart cities as part of 5 missions that the European Commission had identified as key areas where we have very large social problems and challenges that require us to invest in innovation, work together across sectors, government, business, civil society, all working together, and they're long-term challenges. So not something you're going to fix in 2 to 3 years or even 5 years, but take a much longer period of time. The idea of missions were really inspired by the idea of the moonshot, which was something the United States did in the early 1960s to say, we are, over the course of a decade, going to figure out how to go to the moon and return. So that decade-long kind of time scale and very big ambition is part of what is embedded in the idea of a mission. The objective of this mission around climate neutral and smart cities is to help 100 cities in Europe try to achieve climate neutrality, as well as integrating all of the smart city technologies and practices by 2030. That's a very aggressive target, and we'll talk a little bit about what that might mean. Net Zero Cities itself is the platform to support the mission, both to support the Commission, but more importantly, help the cities with this process. And our job is to provide support in terms of expertise and services, information, resources, access to tools, to help achieve this goal. And for us, it's very much whatever it takes to achieve this is what it is we need to do to help the cities in this path. You can see on the map on the screen that identifies where the cities are that are part of this mission. So Malmö and Copenhagen are among a set of 112 cities selected by the Commission from across Europe about 16 months ago. Those cities are large and small. They're geographically representing all of Europe. And they also are quite representative in terms of where they're at in responding to the challenges of the climate emergency. Some are very advanced, like cities like Malmö and Copenhagen, and some are much earlier in their process. And so we have a very interesting mix of cities to work with through this process. The idea behind that mix is to enable us to learn as much as possible. The mission objectives, very straightforward. Develop an approach to climate neutral transformation in cities, provide a platform for cities to access services and expertise that they'll need, build capabilities at the city level for working to advance systemic changes. Innovation has to be a part of that because we have to learn how to do that, and we want to learn how to do that together. And then facilitate a growing pipeline and community of cities accelerating towards climate neutrality. The last thing I want to note about this is it's not enough for these 100 or 112 cities in this case to achieve this outcome. This needs to help all European cities and ultimately provide ideas about how the entire world can respond to the climate challenge, because it's a global challenge, and a few cities themselves reaching climate neutrality does not represent the necessary response. We all need to get there together. Support from Net Zero Cities in the platform comes in 4 primary ways. There's a platform that organizes and makes accessible to all cities the tools, resources, expertise, and capabilities that they will need. We have an online portal as well as a team of city advisors and experts who work as teams with each of the cities on very specific tailored support on whatever it is that they need help with to achieve this outcome. We've also developed in our approach a climate transition map, which is meant to be a bit of a roadmap to help cities with this process. We're using a tool that was developed here in Sweden called Climate Neutral City Contracts as a tool to help governments at the city, regional, national, and European level work together to create the authority necessary to take action to achieve climate neutrality, as well as to better organize resources to make the investments that we'll need. And then finally, we have a pilot cities program, which is meant to invest in specific innovation actions that cities need to take to learn how to achieve climate neutrality. I want to very quickly introduce a few of these, and note that they'll be available for you on our website to explore at your leisure. One is the climate transition map, which is really based on world-leading thinking around systemic innovation and how to learn through doing in order to achieve a very aggressive path. I won't go through this in a lot of detail, but again, it's there for you to explore at your leisure. We can discuss it in a little more detail as appropriate. We've also talked with cities about their needs, about the drivers of change, and what barriers they face. And so we've got that well documented. Again, that's available through our website so that you can explore how cities have seen the challenges that they face and what their needs are in that regard. We know from that work that the key needs fall into 5 primary areas: policy and governance, implementation practices, so how to move faster at scale, to do more, better, faster is a simple way of thinking about it. Addressing issues around culture, social innovation, behavior, and to encourage all businesses, individuals, and organizations to participate. To develop better financing and business models for achieving this outcome, and to incorporate strategic learning, including spelling learning correctly, into our processes as we go forward. This is just an illustration of how cities will work together, building teams that cut across multiple aspects of society: utilities, government, nonprofit organizations, civil society, citizens, corporations, universities and education institutions, hospitals, and other large institutions into a transition team that can drive the work at the local level. We also know that part of this process requires us to learn through doing. And one of the things that we've recognized very quickly is that it's not just about our emissions. It's about making our communities healthy, vibrant, safe, socially diverse and interactive, and that we really need to support leadership in all of those areas. This is just a quick illustration of how we work together. And with that, we've done some case studies as an example. But I think with that, I will stop, Anders, because I know you have some questions and we want to get into the conversation.
So much, Thomas. Very inspiring. And of course, this is a huge program. What have you learned so far from working with the Net Zero Cities program?
Thanks. I've been thinking about this question, what have we learned? And I might start by saying, I think we knew or thought we knew a number of things about how cities are going to need to be supported and helped in this process so that we could plan ahead and anticipate these needs as we go forward. I see I'm on the screen twice. Let me just exit from one of those. First, I would say we need strong, trusted relationships that we need to build between the cities and Net Zero Cities to foster a really close and effective working partnership. We can't work together very well if we don't know each other, if we don't trust each other, if we don't have those quality relationships. That's true in all aspects of life. It's true in work like this as well. I think the second thing is we know cities need capacity and support from experts with a lot of different knowledge and capabilities. And each city has its own specific needs in that regard. So our job isn't to just provide a general set of tools and resources and experts who provide general support. Our job is to build through that relationship a very specific approach with each city to help them with their specific needs. Some cities may have very strong technical teams who have a lot of knowledge about buildings and energy use or transportation and how to move towards cleaner forms of transportation and drive down car use, but they may not have the finance expertise. Some cities might have great policy expertise, but may not have the technical people who have the ability to drive that work. Cities large and small have very different capacities. So we need to respond to each city's needs. Another thing is cities advance best by learning together and by working together. One of the benefits of having so many cities working on this mission is that we learn from each other, and we have so many cities trying different things and working in slightly different ways that we get more and we learn more out of that process. And our job is to make sure that cities are able to talk to each other about what they're doing. If they're tackling similar problems, how are they doing that? If they need to change some things, who can they draw inspiration from, et cetera. And then the last thing I would say is we know that cities cannot do this without active participation from national governments, from the European Commission, and in some of the countries in Europe, regional governments will have a huge role in helping cities to take the necessary actions. That has to do with policy and regulation, and it has to do with funding and finance and broad engagement of society. This is a societal problem. Cities are being asked to lead in addressing. They can't do that without support from higher levels of government. We also are learning that attention to this particular element, this multi-level governance, that's a lot of syllables, but multi-level governance, how city government, regional government, national government in Europe work together on a very challenging problem is going to be central to achieving this outcome.
So what are your biggest challenges here?
Well, if I think about the challenges that we face, one is 2030 is very close. It's not far away. It's a very aggressive goal. We have had at least 40 years of economic policies and globalization, which has made decarbonization of our economy and our communities really hard to achieve. I think I was just talking to somebody about 30 years ago in my work, when I was still in the United States, Germany was one of the leaders in the world in regulating packaging and reducing packaging in the waste stream. We know to achieve these outcomes, we're going to have to further reduce packaging, especially plastic packaging, in our waste stream. That is now much more difficult than it was 30 years ago because of global supply chains. So it's very hard to address those issues, which is, again, why we need all of the European level policy attention. They're going to bump up against the political cycles and political dynamics. So when you're trying to do hard things in a policy context, the politics have to be managed. So we need to be aware of that. One of the tools we've tried to build is to help cities be able to paint the right economic picture to their communities, their businesses, and stakeholders about achieving climate neutrality. Because one of the messages is, yes, it requires us to invest a lot of money, but it is also going to really stimulate our economy and make our economy durable and resilient to traditional economic cycles because of the investments we'll have to make to reduce our climate emissions.
Can you say something about what kind of leadership that is needed for this transition?
Yeah, obviously it's an important question, and as I was talking about the issues of managing the politics of very aggressive policy work, leadership has to be capable of active and sustained engagement of citizens and stakeholders if they're going to be able to sell the social and economic benefits of decarbonization to their communities. How is it going to make people's lives better? How is it going to help businesses continue to survive, operate, and even thrive? We know that if we invest in making our houses climate neutral and resilient, they're better places to live. People are going to be healthier. That's also true in commercial buildings. So we need to have that kind of active, sustained engagement. And to be able to do that up and down, talking to citizens and talking to commissioners at the European Commission.
Thank you. And lastly, looking at Malmö and Copenhagen, do they distinguish themselves, those two cities?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, I had the chance to first come and visit Copenhagen and Malmö back in 2007. I was working in the United States at the time, and the whole reason to come was to learn from the leadership that these two cities had in various aspects of their work. And so, you know, these two cities have been cities that the whole world has been looking at for a number of years now. If I think about it in the context of the mission and climate action, I'd note a couple of things in particular. One is that the cities have been early movers, of course, and advanced progress ahead of most cities. And there's a lot of attention on Copenhagen and Malmö around what they're doing and how it's working. You know, I would note, and I think most of us are aware, Copenhagen has long been seen as the most ambitious city in terms of achieving climate neutrality, as they'd set a goal publicly to achieve it by 2025. That's a very, very ambitious and noteworthy goal to set in public. Many cities have set goals for 2040, some for 2035. Now we have all these cities saying 2030. Copenhagen's goal is still above that. What's interesting is that requires you to be quite out in the open with the public. And in this case, in the last year, we've seen a number of articles around, is Copenhagen going to make it? What's holding them back? How are they going to be able to adapt to where they are from when they set that goal more than 10 years ago? So many people who work with cities around the world see Malmö as a real pioneer in many aspects of sustainable development and working at a community level to achieve that. So we're seeing more and more and more of that from other cities. I think what would be interesting for Copenhagen and Malmö is drawing upon what other cities are doing in other aspects. We often talk about some of the early leaders in cities and climate action are very good at the technical aspects of this, but we haven't had to engage citizens and businesses at the level we now need to. So we need to deepen our engagement activities. We need to open up governance to bring those people into these processes, because they have to accept policies that are going to be much more aggressive than we've seen before. They're going to need to be part of programs to make massive investments in their buildings, in their infrastructure, in their businesses potentially, to help them respond to this challenge. And then the last thing I'd note, and we're very excited about what Malmö is doing in their pilot cities work, is cities are changing how they work inside. So it's not just what they're doing, it's how they work. We often talk about inside city government, people tend to work in silos of their departments. And we know how important it is to tackle this challenge. We need to work across these different areas within city government. And Malmö has been doing some really great work over the last 2 years to really tackle that in response to this specific objective and this goal. And so we're gonna really learn a lot about how that's going. We'll be able to bring Malmö alongside other cities that are trying to do similar things and really try to get this right, because the stakes are very high. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And stick around, Thomas, because we have questions for you already at the Q&A session later on.
Happy to do it, and I look forward to it.
Great. And with us we now have Jonas Kamle, Chief Climate Transition Officer in Malmö, and also Mette Skorbier, Head of Climate Unit in Copenhagen. Welcome. Malmö and Copenhagen are both forerunners that aim to inspire other cities in Europe. But will Malmö and Copenhagen be climate neutral by 2030? Mette, what's your view here?
Well, thank you so much for having me here. As Thomas just mentioned, we've had a public goal in Copenhagen in our current climate plan to actually become climate neutral already in 2025. This is a target that was set by the City Council back in 2012, and we've been working towards that goal since. Heat and electricity has been the areas where emissions have been reduced the most, and it has happened through cooperation with our utility companies who invested and still invest in new production capacity based on renewable energy sources, and it has been key for this transition to happen. Still, as Thomas also mentioned, it became clear for us last year that we won't be able to achieve the climate neutrality goal by 2025, primarily due to a delay in the implementation of carbon capture at Copenhagen's waste incinerator plant. So while we won't become climate neutral in 2025, we are still expecting to reduce emissions from our initial state in 2010 by 80% in 2 years' time. And now we started developing a new climate plan towards 2035 with guiding goals of both becoming climate positive and also to reduce emissions from consumption-based emissions in 2035. So just to give to take a long answer and make it short, yes, I do actually believe that Copenhagen will be climate neutral in 2030.
Thank you, Mette. And Jonas, what about Malmö?
Yes, we will be climate neutral by 2030, and potentially a little bit depending on how we fall out. Actually, we might be a little bit climate positive as well. But as things are looking right now, then yes, we do have a shot. It will be very hard work, and it will be a complicated journey, but I think we can make it.
That's great to hear. So what are your city's biggest challenges, and how do you tackle them? Mette, what's your view?
Well, in a territorial perspective, what we're looking at here, our biggest challenge is mitigating emissions from transportation. Transport emissions, primarily from car transport, has not been reduced as much as we expected. There's a lot of reasons for this. One thing is a general trend that we see a rise in private car ownership per capita. So it's a trend that's not exactly working to help us reduce emissions. But on the other hand, we also seen that emissions from road traffic has not grown in the time of the climate plan either. So I mean, there's something pointing towards some shift also in the transportation. So even if we have a growth in car ownership, we've also seen a raise in population. So we are 100,000 more Copenhageners today than we were in 2010. So there is some sort of shift happening, probably from a shift in from fossil fuel powered vehicles to electric cars. But we also think that this is due to the fact that many Copenhageners still use their bike to get around the city. And we still have many more ownerships of bikes, five times more than cars actually in Copenhagen. So I believe that we still see some trends that are positive on green mobility, but we're also having a hard time tackling some of these. That's also why we looked at carbon capture as an alternative way to reduce emissions. And we still believe that carbon removal will be part of the way forward for Copenhagen.
Thank you. Jonas, these two cities are so close. Do you share the same challenges as
We have the
well?
exact same challenges.
The exact.
Exactly the same challenges. Transportation is going to be a major challenge for us. And I think adding to what Mette spoke about, it's also a cultural issue. It's about, can we live with one car instead of having two cars? Can we use a bike instead? Can we use public transport? And it's something that touches on you depending on where you are in your life.
Yeah.
If you're a student, you have certain circumstances. If you are a parent who needs to drop off kids at school and make your life work, then you have different circumstances. And it's about us trying to make possible that you can actually have a car free, or at least be able to use a car as little as possible. But also then when you need to be able to shift to electrical, that we actually have infrastructure that allows for you to charge your vehicle. Even if you're a tenant and renting your apartment, you need a place somewhere where you can charge. So I think that's definitely the same. And we also have, like Copenhagen, we also have the same challenge with, or we need to have CCS or CCU in place. Otherwise, there's no way for us to reach the goal. But I think actually the main challenges here are actually that we have a disconnect in the goals. So we have goals in the cities and at a European level to have climate neutral cities by 2030. But at least in Sweden's case, the national politics are not aligned at all currently with that.
And what does that do to your work?
So what that does is that the suggestion now, for example, when it comes to the fuel mix that we have a lot of renewable fuels mixed into our regular pumps. That will be shifted and actually removed, and that will add probably another 15% of our emissions locally. So we need to have that alignment that Thomas was speaking about earlier. It needs to stick together. The local work needs to stick together with the regional policies, the national policies, and the European policies. And there's a major gap right now. And that is going to be a major obstacle for us to actually become climate neutral by 2030.
And when you're talking about changing culture, which is, I guess, a hard thing to do, I guess that this disconnect between the local and the national signals plays a part, makes
Absolutely.
it harder, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we don't have the same biking culture that Copenhagen has. We do have a strong biking culture, but not to that extent. But what we can see is that there is a major drive. People want to be a part of the transition and be a part of the solution and not just the problem. But we can also see the national policies are putting up more and more roadblocks for people to actually make the shift over. And so instead of helping and paving the way, they're actually putting up roadblocks to stop people and making it even harder transition. And I think that's a conversation that we're going to need to have over the coming next years. That's going to be crucial if we want to have climate neutral cities by 2030.
Do you share knowledge or some other kind of exchange between your two cities, Jonas?
Absolutely. So Copenhagen and Malmö has had a long history of course, of collaboration. We're very close, as you said, and anything from the metro to get a metro station between, or a connection line between the two cities, is one of the larger infrastructure projects. But there's also projects, as Mette was speaking about, that Copenhagen are now looking to put a new climate plan in action. And we had a number of visits from Copenhagen to Malmö to talk about what were our goals, how did we approach them, and so we have learnings also on a very practical level. So we have the big infrastructure projects that we have conversations on. We have conversations on energy infrastructure and then the energy transformation, but also very practical. What kind of goals did you set? How did you work with the goals? And what can we learn from each other on that practical level? And I think that's very important.
Mette, do you want to add something here?
No, I just want to totally agree with you, Jonas, because I mean, the visits we have between the two cities and the interaction and the knowledge sharing is very fruitful, and I think it helps us to learn and also be confident in some of the choices that we're going to make, also looking forward. And I think my work is primarily focused on the new climate plan, focusing on consumption-based emissions, and we've been very much inspired by the work and the approach made in Malmö and some of the other Swedish cities. So,
thank you. And for those of you watching, please write questions to Mette and Thomas and Jonas, and we'll have a Q&A session later. Mette, we were talking about culture here. How do you work in Copenhagen to get the citizens to take active part in this transition?
I was very inspired also by what Thomas said earlier, that the way we've been approaching climate transition for some years now has been a little bit distant from the citizens' level. As I started out by telling, I mean, much of the transition so far has happened in the energy sector and in converting the energy system from fossil fuel to green and renewable sources, and it's somewhat distant from the individual Copenhagener. But going forward, we have to involve the citizens and the communities even more, especially as we start addressing these consumption-based emissions. I believe that communities and groups of citizens will become a very central actor for the municipality to engage with and actually collaborate with on the transformation on a local level. We need citizens both to inform us, advise us, but also challenge us and take an active part in implementation. And to do that, we have just initiated the first Climate Citizens Assembly in Copenhagen. So only just a week ago, we sent out invitations to 50,000 Copenhageners to sign up to be part of this citizen assembly. We're going to randomly select 36 Copenhageners that will assist and advise the city council on the development of the new climate plan, but also on the implementation when the climate plan is adopted. So that's one way of formalizing citizen involvement in climate action. Another thing I'd like to mention is, and that's something we're trying for the first time. On Saturday, the 24th of September, we'll have the first local climate summit in Copenhagen. And this is a method or a way to try and give the local community the task of mobilizing on local climate action. They will sign and write a common charter for climate action in the community, and we will seek to help them how to implement the concrete initiatives in the charter. If this is a viable method, I think this is something we'd like to do more, and in more parts of the cities. We will have 2 more local summits next year, and I actually believe that we'll see different variation on how climate transition can look on the local level that is reflecting how the local community looks and which strong actors and civil society organizations, businesses, and other local community organizations there are in the area. So we're very excited about the local summit and hope to see some concrete results.
Yes, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing. Jonas, how do you work in Malmö with making the citizens take active part?
I think what Mette said was excellent. I felt exactly the same.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that we did was that we actually set a goal, or our politicians set a goal that the emissions, living in Malmö, you should be able to reduce your emissions by 50% as a citizen by 2030. So the mission primarily deals with goals talking about the geographical emissions, but this is more of a consumption-based goal, saying that by 2030 we should be able to halve the emissions for our citizens, which is of course an extremely ambitious goal. And we do have some of the tools that Mette spoke about are already in play. I mean, you have the citizen suggestion boxes where the citizens can come with different ideas, and then we respond to them, and it can become
and
a
do you
political
get
decision.
ideas here?
We get lots of
yeah?
ideas, and it's fun to engage with the citizens in that way. We also have the classical urban and spatial planning processes where citizens are involved, and school children and so forth, and we work together with schools to talk about climate, and we have the klimatprat, climate talks, to talk about what's happening with the climate and what are the things that we're working on. But we also see we have the green labs, which is kind of like a test that we did using areas in the city that are not planned to do anything special the next 5-10 years. We've tested using those to create meeting places and so forth. And we also during the spring we're testing something that we call the climate efforts, or klimatinsats, where citizens can say, look, I want to be a part of this. We know that they want to be a part of this, and they can go online and get a little bit of guidance about some of the tools and choices that they can make. And what we did was a little bit different than your usual kind of climate calculator, and you go online and, well, this is what I do in my choices. Because we know that a lot of citizens in Malmö and in Copenhagen are dealing with the inflation, the high energy prices, and a very difficult economic situation. And so what we did was that we identified options that you can make in your day-to-day life that both addresses the climate challenge, but also addresses have a positive impact on your economy. And I think that's also very important to meet the citizens where they are. And I think that's now that we're starting to look at how should we scale this, what's the next step for us. That's something that we need to understand more about the citizens' needs and what do they want to do, and how can we meet them in that. What's the role that we have? What's the role that civil societies organization have, and how do we interact in the best possible way? And we have so much to learn in that area.
Yeah, and I guess people watching this will have this question: what can I do? And the other way is, what can we demand of people from the city? What can you demand? So what would your answer be here? What could they do, and what do you think that you can demand of them at this point?
I think that I met the about 300 actors yesterday talking about how we build new into the city, and I said that either we do this together or we don't do it at all. And I think that's the exact same thing goes for the citizens of Malmö. The goals that our politicians have set are the goals that they have elected, and so it is their goal, our goals, and I think that's something that we need to take into our heart. It's our goals. It's not someone else's goals. This is our goals. And I think everyone, as far as I know, there's a major drive, and a lot of science and research shows that people want to be part of the solution. They want to be a part of actually solving this crisis. And it's something that we know that a lot of citizens have at the top of their ranking list of concerns for the future is the climate. And I think that everyone can do something, You can't do everything, but everyone can do something. And at least we put together on, if you go online to malmo.se, you will find that list of actions that you can take, and you can be part of the solution today if you have that drive and you want to do something. Everyone can do something today. And I think it's just about starting. And because as soon as you start rolling and you start going and having those conversations with your friends, your neighbors, and so forth, you'll find out that there's a lot of people involved, and that brings that momentum that Thomas was speaking about. There's a momentum between the cities, and there's a conversation happening, and I think we need to build that same conversation within our cities.
Thank you. And yes, we have some questions from the audience. And Thomas, I hope you're still with us. Here's a question from Henrik. Were there many cities that applied to become part of the Net Zero Cities mission without succeeding in becoming a mission city? And if so, what has been the most common reason for this, for not failing to get into that list?
So it's a great question. I really appreciate it. It allows me to talk a little bit about, not just how we help the cities that were selected, but how we help all cities in Europe with addressing their climate needs. Because consistent with European policy, all of Europe needs to be climate neutral by 2050 and all cities by 2045 as part of the challenge. So when the Commission invited cities to express their interest to participate in this mission, obviously it comes with the willingness to make at a political level this commitment to this ambition and this target. So that was an absolute given for the cities to be selected for this. We had 377 cities across Europe submit expressions of interest to participate when the mission was set forth to try to identify 100. And I think everybody would say that that was a larger number of cities than anyone expected. It was nearly 20% of Europe's population captured by those cities. And not all, but almost all national capital cities were included amongst those cities. So it was a very large number. So really, we were only able to pick less than 1/3 of the cities that expressed an interest in participating and were willing to make a commitment to climate neutrality. The factors in the selection by the Commission, and I wasn't part of that selection, so I can't say too precisely, but what I do know from the conversations were there was a desire to balance geography so that this mission is representative of all of Europe and not just parts of Europe that are the most focused on this issue or have done the most already. It was not meant to pick just those cities that are the closest to making the target and therefore have the best chance. And it wasn't meant to be focused on the biggest cities in Europe. It was meant to be representative of cities across all of Europe of different types and in different positions. So there was some balancing there. I think there were also questions about cities' readiness to engage with the mission. Now, that's a subjective thing to do when the Commission is looking at it, but they asked for quite a lot of information from each of the cities that submitted an expression of interest to participate. And so they did have the ability to make some selections. So what you see here is a balance of representation of cities by geography, size, and climate degree of climate action so far, as well as the strength of the commitment that they've made to try to pursue this outcome.
And another question to you, Thomas. Are there any cities outside Europe that also wants to be those pioneer cities taking a lead? Or is this something that Europe is taking the lead on?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are cities around the world who have, even before this mission, demonstrated quite a bit of leadership and willingness to work on a very aggressive timeline. I won't try to list them all, but I would note that there's a network of cities globally called the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. Both cities here are part of that. They've been working together for more than 10 years to share information, learn from each other, and help each other with their goals. And that's probably a place where a lot of the leadership globally happens. You've got cities from North America, the US and Canada. You've got cities from Australia, from Asia, all part of this network who are trying to learn together. There is a global mission. It's not as ambitious that the Commission has also catalyzed. That sought to galvanize cities to work together around their climate action as well. It's not as aggressive in terms of full climate neutrality by 2030, but it is seeking to help cities accelerate their activities. The last thing I would note is we have, through the portal and Net Zero Cities, and you can see the website here above me, we have and will be over the next year building out a lot of information tools and support to help cities who aren't part of the mission follow along. We have a twinning program, so we connect cities to those pilot cities in our program, so that we can accelerate the learning process and build those connections. But we also have a lot of material that will be available through our website and through our portal for the cities to draw upon everything that the mission cities are learning to help them as well.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And we have a question for Mette and Jonas here. Are there any low-hanging fruits in your cities which, with small funds or small actions, would make a big difference to the city's emissions? Mette, do you have any low-hanging fruits that you want to grab?
I think the answer is both yes and no. I think, of course, there are more low-hanging fruits that we can work on. And one of the things we actually want to focus on first with the Citizen Assembly is trying to identify some of those low-hanging fruits, some of the policies, the initiatives we could take at a city level that the participants in the Citizens Assembly actually think are just plug and play and something that they align with and want us to just move forward on. But I think also that having been working on reducing emissions for many years, I think some of the low-hanging fruits are already effectuated. So I think also we're looking at some challenging instruments to be put in play now. So when we discussed transportation and emissions from transportation earlier, I think we have done a major work in trying to make it more attractive, easy, accessible, to move around the city using like on foot or on bicycle or in public transportation. I think if you want to really reduce emissions from transport, I think you need other instruments because we're trying to compete with the fact that cars are still, for many citizens, a form of transportation that they enjoy. And therefore, I think the low-hanging fruits in transport, for instance, are a little bit harder to find now.
And Jonas?
Well, I think if I start with what Mette ended with, I think transportation is the most low-hanging fruit that we have. We have the infrastructure in place to bike more, walk more, and use more public transport. So if we can make that shift, if citizens in Malmö are wanting or willing to do that, that will have an impact immediately. So we don't need to invest to actually utilize that. It's something we can do immediately. If we're talking about investments in the shorter term, then the biggest investment that I can see that will have an impact within 1 to 2 years would be sorting out plastic waste going to waste incineration. That would give us an emission reduction somewhere around 10 to 15% on an annual basis. And that's an investment that we can make now, and that will have an impact quickly. So I think those are the two things. But it's, of course, best to utilize the infrastructure that we already have in place and use that more and better. And then everything else takes more and more time. And the larger the investments, the further down the road. And that's I think that's one of the things that we learned. So we ran some scenario analysis where we looked at what options do we have to become climate neutral by 2030. And one was where we focused on behavioral changes, and one was more technical and more investment heavy. And what we can see with the behavioral changes is something that can happen much, much faster at a lower cost and better socioeconomic impact, while the more technical issues, they take a longer time, are more investment heavy, cost more, and have a lower socioeconomic impact. But once they're in place, they stay, while behavior changes can change on and off depending on what's happening. So I think the combination of these two together is the crucial element. If we want fast impact, behavioral changes will give the fastest impact, but we need those technical changes as well of the systems that support the citizens and the businesses in Malmö.
And very brief, a question to all three of you, starting with Thomas. As we know, it's a dark, gloomy world at the moment. What makes you inspired and positive when you're looking at the climate issue, Thomas?
Well, I think first and foremost for me, the part that's the most uplifting and inspiring and hopeful is when we're doing this work in our communities. It's people who know each other, live together, work together, see each other in their own communities, who are working together on a collective problem. It's not possible for us to solve this problem from the top. Even though there are a lot of things that need to be done at the top, the work actually needs to get done in our communities. And the work doing that, not only is it encouraging because you can see the results and it's tangible, but it also is far removed from some of the other things in our lives that may feel a little bit heavy. And it doesn't mean that it diminishes those things. It just means that we can balance it out with things that we're doing that make a difference.
Thank you. Mette, what do you say?
I very much agree with Thomas. And you asked earlier if how much we can demand from the citizens. I think actually we're at a place right now where we don't need to demand it. We actually can just respond, because I think many people are concerned about the climate crisis and want to take an active part in their local community, as Thomas mentioned. And I think we need, as cities, to facilitate that in the way that we develop the city, the spaces, the areas, the surroundings we have in the city, but also facilitate that the dialogue and the conversations that are needed, the interaction between civil society, businesses, and public authorities. I think that's one of the keys to actually make that change. And also, now Jonas mentioned the whole thing about the new normal or the changes in behavior. I think that's one of the things that I believe can actually give us a breakthrough in the years to come. I think if we can mobilize more people for action around climate change, I think we can also actually not from the top change norms and cultures, but actually make the citizens make that transition in the local communities and take action and create those new normals that make a little more sustainable and climate-friendly lifestyle the way forward.
Thank you, Mette. And Jonas, what makes you smile?
Well, I think when we launched Climate Transition Malmö, that we said that this will take somewhere between 4 to 5 years until we're actually fully up and running. And we're about halfway in now, so about 2 years into the transition. And the momentum that is starting to accelerate in the organization, and Thomas mentioned before that we're actually organized to work across the silo, so we don't get stuck in our own silo. The way of working where we start always with understanding the goal. Where do we want to be? Where are we today? And what does that shift look like? And what options do we have? That is starting to gain a lot of momentum, not only within our own organization, but also when it comes to businesses and civil society organizations. And we're starting to see more and more things pop up. And I think that's always fun, is when you hear about these initiatives that have come out of, well, we heard you talk about this, and then we said, well, we can do the exact same thing, and then they just went and did it. And I think that's going to be, it's about picking these things up as they pop up. We need to be able to capture them, because I think there's so many things that are happening that we don't hear about, and we need to be able to pick them up and capture them and tell those stories, because I think storytelling will be a very important part of this. Average people telling about the choices that they're making to make that difference, to be part of the climate transition. Those are the conversations, those stories that we need to feed into, because there's so much happening that we don't know about, and there's a growing momentum, and that's accelerating the transition.
And that's the stories that's changing culture, right?
Absolutely.
Jonas, Mette, and Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you want to follow Malmö's climate transition work, go to malmo.se and search for Miljö och klimat. We'll paste the link here in the chat as well. This was the first seminar of 2 from Malmö's Environment Department during Malmö in the Making, and we'll be back September 26 with a seminar about how to achieve a climate-neutral building sector. And of course, as you know, the emissions from the building sector amounts to 20% of Sweden's total emission, so we have a lot to gain by transforming this sector. We'll paste the link to this new seminar in the chat as well. Of course, we would like to thank once again all the participants here today and everyone who has been watching. Thank you so much.